Hello everyone, in today's video we are going to talk about chapters comparison. What I mean by chapters comparison is that given a property of interest, we can extract that property of each chapters along the Harry Potter novels, and then we can compare the properties of each chapters side by side. So let's look at some examples. So for example, one property that we can compare is the number of characters inside each chapters. This is a synonym to the length of the chapters. So for example, in book number 1, chapter number 1, The Boy Who Lived, it has about 25,000 characters. And then book number 3, chapter number 10, The Marauder's Map, has about 40,000 characters. By plotting the number of characters of each chapters side by side, we can clearly see that book number 5, chapter 5, The Order of Phoenix is the longest chapter. And then the very last chapter, book number 7, chapter 37, 19 years later, is the shortest chapter. Okay. Another example is the number of occurrence of the word Harry. This figure shows that book 1, chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived, has the words Harry occurred 20 times. In chapter 5 of book 1, Diagon Alley, the word Harry occurred about 150 times. After comparing each chapters, we can easily find out that the word Harry appeared the most in book number 4, chapter 26, The Second Task. And the chapter that the word Harry appears least is book number 6, chapter number 1, The Other Ministers. So after going through these examples, I hope you understand what I mean by chapter comparisons. Now let's see how we can do that mentally, and then we can go to the code after that. So the process is actually very simple because in our last video we already did some pre-processing. We have converted this single file which has all the contents of our Harry Potter novels into individual files where each file represents one chapter. The file name also has the book number and chapter number as a prefix, and then the chapter name followed by that. After we have done this pre-processing, what we can do is we need to initialize an empty list for storing chapter properties, and then we just need to simply loop through each chapter. So for each chapter, we will extract the chapter properties and save the chapter to the list. After we finish this loop, then we will have all the data that we need. Okay, let's see some example in the code. I am learning Visual Studio Code recently, so we are going to go through our Jupyter Notebook inside VS Code. The interface looks a bit different, but the major components are the same. First thing we need to do is we need to open this file that has all the chapter names, and then store all the chapter names inside this object I call chapters. So this chapter is nothing but a list of elements. Inside each element is a string that has all the chapter names. But notice that at the end of each element there is this new line characters, which is something that we don't want. So I'm going to remove that out. We can do that very simple by just loop through each element of these chapters, okay? And then within each element, replace these special new line characters with an empty string. After we do that and print out this chapter list again, then inside each element there's no longer a new line characters. Okay, let's do an example to find out a property of a single chapters, and then after that we can do it for all the chapters. So for example, we select the chapter of interest. I'm selecting the chapter with index number 4, which is book number 1, chapter 5, Diagon Alley. So with this chapter name selected, we can open a particular file and then read all the lines into this object which I call lines. These lines is just simply a list of only one element, and that element contains a string of the entire chapter. We can simply extract the length of these chapters by using this function length parenthesis and then the first element of these lines. So it's telling us that the length of book number 1, chapter number 5, Diagon Alley is about 37,000 characters. We can always change this index. Okay, so for example, index number 30 is actually book number 2, chapter number 14, Cornelius Fudge, and the length of that chapter is about 23,000 characters. Okay, we can also do something more interesting. For example, find out the number of occurrence of the word Harry inside the chapters. So we first determine the word of interest. In this case is Harry, and then the number of occurrence of Harry will be 61. We can always change this word to, for example, Ron. Then the number of occurrence of Ron will be 34 in this chapter, which is chapter 14 of book number 2, Cornelius Fudge. This gives an example of how we can extract property for one single chapter. Now we just need to find out a property for all chapters. All we need to do is first initialize a empty list. Okay, I'm calling this list chapter len, representing the length of each chapters, and then we need to loop through each chapters. So for chapter name in chapters, we are going to open that particular file, and then we are going to store the length of the chapters into this chapter underscore length list. Okay, after we do that and then print out this chapter length, we can get a list of the number of characters of each chapters. Similarly, we can get the number of occurrence of the word Harry by first initialize an empty string. Word occurrence equals to an empty string, and the words of our interest is Harry. So after that, we can start looping through our chapters. For each chapter name, we are going to open a particular file and then use this method of a string called .count parenthesis word. This will tell us how many times does this word occur inside this string. So after we do that and then print it out, we can have a list of numbers, each number representing the number of times the word Harry appears in that particular chapter. We can also obtain the chapter with the least and the largest property values. So for example, if we want to find out the longest chapters, we can use this .index methods of a list. So remember, this chapter length is a list of numbers, and each number represents the number of characters inside each chapter. So we can use this .index methods, which will return the index of the values found inside this list. And the value that we are interested in is the maximum value. So we pass in max parenthesis chapter length. This returns the maximum value of the chapter length. And then .index to return the maximum index. And then we are going to pass this index into our chapters. Remember, these chapters has all the chapters names. That way it will output the chapters, which is the longest chapters inside the series. Similarly, we can find out the shortest chapters. This time we just need to pass in, instead of the max, passing the minimum values of this chapter length, find out the index, save that to this min index, okay, and then pass in this min underscore index into these chapters. That way, this will give us the chapter name of the shortest chapter. Okay, as you can see here, the Order of Phoenix is the longest chapter, and 19 years later is the shortest chapter. Okay, similarly, we can find out the chapter in which Harry appears the most, and then the chapter in which Harry appears the least. So the word Harry appears the most in this chapter, the second task. The word Harry appears the least in this chapter, the other minister. Now let's talk about how to put all those results into a figure. I'm going to use matplotlib.pyplot in these examples because I believe matplotlib is a very popular visualize libraries in Python. I first specify our figure size, because we are going to have a very long list of chapters, so the vertical length will be longer than the horizontal length. So my figure size, I set it to be 10 and 40. Margins y equals to 0 is just because sometimes if I don't set that, then there will be a large white space after the last chapter and then also before the first chapter. So let me give you an example. You see this white space over here, and then also at the very bottom there's a white space over here. To eliminate that, I need to set the margins on y-axis to be 0. Okay, and I'm going to use the horizontal bar graph inside Matplotlib. So it's a plt.barh, and we are going to plot chapters versus chapter length. The X label, which is the horizontal label, is the number of characters of each chapters, and then plt show. Okay, so this is the figure that we have seen previously. And then this is the syntax for you to save your images into a PNG file. You can use this .savefig method. Enter your directory and make sure you pass these second parameters bbbox inches equals to height. If you don't do that, then for some reason it will not save the entire image. It will crop the left side of the images, and then you will not be able to see the full chapter names for some of the chapters. Okay, very similar, we can plot the chapters versus their number of word occurrence. So everything's the same. Right here we are plotting chapters versus the word occurrence, and here are the results, which is the figure that we have already seen that in the beginning of the video. And here's how you save it. Okay, that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to like and subscribe my video. I will see you in my next video. Thank you.